What does Utah men's basketball need to do to become a powerhouse once again? We're talking about that and the state of the Utah offensive line heading into spring ball on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, want to thank all of you who continue to subscribe and support our show. We're over 960 subscribers now, which is outstanding. Would love to interact with you guys in the YouTube comments. You can also find me on social media at JT Wistrcill or find us on our social media platform at Locked On Utes. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, we're going to be talking some Utah basketball, what the program needs to do to get back to the days when they were a prominent program in college basketball, which is far from the case at the moment, coming off a disappointing loss to Stanford. Then we'll touch on some things with the Utah offensive line, preview kind of the keys for them heading into spring ball, and talk a little bit about last year's offensive line and some of the things that they did do really well and didn't do really well, and how that affects and pertains to what we want to see from the Utah offensive line coming up in the 2023 season. But as I mentioned, we got to start with Utah basketball. Really disappointing early exit for the Utes in Pac-12 play, in the Pac-12 tournament, excuse me. Down in Vegas, the Utes fell to the Stanford Cardinal. Utah, the 7th seed, Stanford, the 10th seed, 73-62, and just a night that really was never Utah's. I mean, early on, Stanford jumped out to a lot of leads in this one. I think their largest at one point was over 15 at one point. But Utah really turned the ball over a lot. Stanford capitalizing on the fast break points, the second chance points, also doing a good job. The Cardinals did. Now Utah did have 10 of their own, I guess, but as I said, just a lot of struggles for Utah. I talked about the 12 turnovers overall. Neither team shot well from the free throw line. But look, and I know Stanford has some long wings and they do some nice things. They already beat Utah once, but this is not a good loss for Utah. And I think you can put an asterisk next to it just because of Raleigh coming just his second game back off the injury, Gabe coming back. Neither of those guys were at full strength, but it still sucks whenever you have the kind of season Utah did, where I think at one point in the season, if not one, they were two. I do think there was 1 week or one game, maybe in between a Thursday, Saturday game, where Utah was number one in the Pac-12, just because based on the standings rankings. And either way, if I'm off on that, this team was top three all regular season pretty much until the last 3 weeks when everything really went south. And did injuries play a role in that? Yeah. You know, the other thing that played a huge role in that is the jump up in competition, having to play the Arizona schools, having to play UCLA, USC, having to go to Colorado. We saw Utah struggle with Oregon. Against the best teams in the conference, Utah did not fare well at all. They got the one win against Arizona. And as great as a win that was back in 2022. And you got to be playing your best ball when March rolls around. And as was evident by this game, Utah is not. And I actually think there's something from this game, too, we can take as it relates to what Utah needs to do to get back to being a powerhouse once again. And something that Bill Walton said. And I know a lot of people are very split on Bill Walton. Like they love you either love or you hate Bill Walton. A lot of people, right? I go up and down with him personally. I think some days he's great, and other days I'm like, not my thing. But anyways, this is what Bill Walton said about Utah taking on Stanford. Stanford is rugged, they're tough, they're strong, and they're big, which is the worst type of opponent for this Utah team to face. And I think he's absolutely right. And I think some people might look at that like, well, we have first team. Well, and I should say congrats to Brandon Carlson on being first team All Pac-12, a great honor for him and absolutely well deserved. But what does he mean by tough and rugged and big and all those kind of things? Well, the one thing is, and especially against a team like Stanford, think about how long and athletic Stanford is. That's the other thing I think that when we talk about one of the things this Utah team has to improve on is Utah has to get more athletic. I mean, that is college basketball. The most athletic teams, yes, you got to be skilled too, but man, think about like last year's Final Four, right? How good. And I know North Carolina is not good this year. Duke struggling too, but like Paulo Banchero with that Duke team, think about how talented those Kansas teams are. Those are teams that walk in the gym and they just got dudes all over the place. And look, I'm not trying to say that Utah needs to get like Utah's not going to be that level, right? We know that. But those are the kind of type of players you need to get at least a couple of or something to the level of that just to get more athletic, because the more athletic teams in college basketball, you have to be athletic and you got to be skilled. And Utah has a couple of guys that are skilled, but there's a lot of skilled basketball players in the world, and a lot of them don't have success against the best teams because they're simply not athletic enough. And we see that struggles with Utah against Stanford a lot. We mentioned the long athletic guys that Stanford has. Who does Utah have? Raleigh Worcester is one of the least athletic point guards in the Pac-12. And look, I ate a lot of crow about Raleigh's play early on. The injury impacted his game overall for sure. Your starting point guard can't have 0 points in a Pac-12 tournament game. I mean, that's just, and like I said, I know he was hurt, given it all he's got out there, but just can't happen. And speaking of starters scoring 0, Ben Carlson also only 0. And look, Ben's the kind of guy that does some of the dirty work things, boxes out and all that, but he's also a guy you forget is out there, and not in always the most positive ways. I know PJ Tucker catches a lot of flack because he doesn't score the ball, but just look at the way like a PJ Tucker competes on defense and he draws the other team's best assignment a lot. Ben Carlson usually doesn't. And like I said, he really struggled in this game. Wasn't really there. Ben's not a great athlete either. Stanford against, I mean, we just talk about athletes in general. Let's just go down Utah's lineup. I mean, we just said Raleigh, not very athletic. Lazar, not an exceptional athlete. Marco is solid, can do some athletic things, but I think the problem with Marco, and Keba falls in this too, is I said long and athletic. And Marco has great arm length, right? But height, he's only 6'5", and it's really hard, especially when there were times this year where he had to play power forward, and it's hard when you're going against guys that are that big. Even Keba, and I'm a huge Keba Keita fan, but he's only 6'8", and you see that come into effect once again. Like I said, Utah doesn't have the guys that are these uber athletic, long, tall guys against UCLA, right? Like Brandon Carlson, as great as he was, he struggled in transition with how athletic the UCLA bigs are, and like I said, it's going to be tough for Utah to get up to the level where they are one of the powerhouses in the Pac-12, but it's going to start with on the recruiting trail. You have to get and bring in guys that are more athletic, and this team has simply failed to do that the last 2 years. And yes, as I said, you got Kaba, but I'm also talking about through the transfer portal. Utah hasn't really added these long athletic guys in the transfer portal. And yeah, Marco was one, but once again, 6'5" guy who's asked to play power forward a lot. That can be a difficult task. So like I said, I really feel like it starts on the recruiting trail for this Utah team because just the way college basketball goes and is played. And I think the other thing I'll say for number one, like I said, Utah has to get more athletic. That is the biggest thing on the basketball court to me. You got to get more athletic. The other thing too, I think that look, we're not in the locker room, right? I'm not, you guys aren't, unless you're someone on the team listening to this. And in case and if that's the case, you're probably not going to like what I have to say, but I know Mike Saunders has had his ups and downs all season long. We saw the ups against UCLA, and there's been defensive stuff there, I guess. We saw the same thing with Dave Jenkins last year, right? A lot of ups and downs and stuff. But I feel like when Coach Smith brings in these talented scorers because of those defensive issues, they end up not seeing time. And look, I understand that that's what you want guys who are going to compete on both ends of the floor, who are going to play well on both ends of the floor. And I want to use compete because I think that when you saw guys like Mike Saunders get out there, he was competing most of the time. There were a couple times maybe lapses in effort and small little things, but when you have such talented scorers, you have to roll with some of the lumps on defense. I think that's one thing for Coach Smith is I know he wants his guys who are going to be execute their assignments and all that from a technical standpoint, but you got to put your talent out there sometimes. And especially when they're on the team, I just think it was a mistake for Mike Saunders not to play more this season. And look, like we said, we think Utah is heading for the NIT and all of that. And I don't expect him to play in that either. So either way, the biggest thing for this Utah team is you got to get athletic. You got to get better recruits overall, I feel like. And look, it sounds simple, but I think Chris Burgess can help Utah on the recruiting trail too. And just got to be more of an emphasis for Utah is to roll the dice on some of these forwards and see what they can do. I was just coming off the Big Sky tournament. As you guys know, I'm happy to be back in my own setup now. Once again, and sorry for the delay on this episode's release, but just thinking back on it, like I think about the most athletic team in the Big Sky. They won the tournament. UCLA and Arizona. We know how athletic they are. The top two teams in the Pac-12 this season. USC when they've been prominent in the past. Oregon, athletes all over the place. That's not Utah, and that's something that's got to change. And I think Coach Smith too has to kind of go through the transfer portal, try to find some of those guys, and also when he gets some of those guys in, maybe if he has to sacrifice a little bit on one end to get more on the other, like a Mike Saunders in this case, I think he should do that. So it's going to be an interesting season. I mean, off season, because there was so much optimism around this team for so much of the year. And then February was such a stinker to end, and March is heading in the same direction. And like we said, we'll see what happens when it comes time for next step in NIT play and all those things. But another fascinating offseason to watch because it was still a step in the right direction for Craig Smith's program. That's undoubtable. But when it leaves such a bad taste in your mouth in the end, it kind of does force you to look at the year a lot different too, especially when you look at how Utah fared against a lot of the top teams versus beating up on some of the lesser teams overall in college basketball. So either way, starts on the recruiting trail, and we'll see if Chris Burgess, Coach Smith, the rest of that staff are able to figure it out and get this Utah men's basketball program eventually back to somewhat of a level, or at least at a team that can do like what Larry Krystkowiak and his team did, right? Make a run to the Sweet 16. I think that's something that all Utah fans want to see. So we'll see if they can make it happen. All right, we're going to come back in a second and talk about the Utah offensive line and preview some of the key positions for them heading into spring ball. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. The midway point of the NBA season is past now, but it's still a great time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. And just because the midpoint is past doesn't mean we aren't still have great NBA action going on. This is when the season really tightens up. There's a little over a month left, and all these teams are still jockeying for playoff positions. So make sure you guys head over to FanDuel and get your bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to the points scored and threes drained. You can even do exclusive bets like a 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. You can also include the spread, the money line, the total, and building your favorite NBA bets for the week. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a larger and bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, coming back into this one. We're keeping with our spring ball previews rolling along here. We've touched on the quarterbacks, the running backs, and now it's time for the big guys who make it all go up front, the offensive line. One of my favorite positions is always to talk about. And I think Utah is set up to have another really good offensive line coming into the 2023 season. And it's going to be fun to see these guys get to finalize some things and get some more reps. And when I say more reps, because Utah's going to return 3 starters up front and another guy who started games for them at some point in the season, which is basically what Utah returned the previous year. When you look at what Utah lost from the 2021 season going to the 2022 season, they lost Nick Ford, but it was like, hey, Paul Miley got experience last season, so you feel good there. And the true guy you lost was Bam Olaseni, but then they moved Braden over to left tackle and then kicked Satawa to the outside. So it did kind of shake it up. And then Michael ended up starting. But when I say reps being so important, I'm talking about the Michael Mokafisis of the world, the Satawa Laumeas of the world, guys like that who Michael, yes, he's been a guard now for he is not dealing with a position change like Satawa is going out to right tackle, right? But with Michael, I think there were still a lot of moments and times last season where it was like he's just making mistakes, whether it's pad level related, taking a poor path or an angle, trying to reach the second level or reach block over, losing a rep in pass protection. Just young. One of those things where you go like, oh, he's just young. It's his first year starting, where I think the reps and the extra one-on-one battles and practices only help him get better. It's the same thing for Satawa Laumea, who, as I've said before on this show, I'm a huge fan of Satawa Laumea as a run blocker, especially. I think he did a lot of really good things. I think he did have a very up and down season in pass protection. And I do think his first team all Pac-12 nod, while I'm happy that he earned it and worked for it, I think a lot of that was due to Cam Rising's ability to evade pressure, because if it wasn't for Cam, I think Satawa would have given up a few more sacks than the stat sheet indicated. So, and offensive line play is always something very hard to judge by, especially for, look, the media members who vote on the all Pac-12 teams. They don't have enough time to go back. Most of them don't. I'm sure a couple of them try to do it, but most of them don't watch every single game. So what you have happening is it's like, oh, Utah, Cam Rising hasn't been sacked very much, so we want to highlight the offensive line, which once again, Utah's offensive line was good. And I thought Satawa still had a really good season. Was he one of the top tackles in the Pac-12? Personally, I would say no. So I think there's still room to grow there. And I'm excited because I think another year he's going to be even stronger this year. And I hope he can put together another season that would earn him back-to-back Pac-12, all Pac-12 teams, basically. Also returning to start is Keaton Bills. Bills is outstanding. I mean, what he's done for this Utah offensive line the past couple seasons, road grader in the run game, solid in pass protection for the most part too. So honestly, left guard is a position I probably feel best about right now on this offensive line because of how much trust I have in Keaton Bills. Well, I still feel good about the right side. I feel good about this offensive line overall. I think it's going to be another strong season. Of course, I trust Jim Harding at the helm leading this group too. So I'm excited to see what this Utah offensive line is going to look like, but I have a lot of confidence in those 3 of the main returning starters. Now we get to a couple of the new guys. The first one being Johnny Maea. Now, Johnny Maea did get a couple starts last season, and it's kind of interesting with Paul Miley, right? Paul ended up transferring out. I know he did that, sit down with some BYU people and talked about just a different opportunity. Nothing but love for Paul, as we've talked about numerous times on this show. He was always a great interview. And I think he did a lot of positive things last year. Yeah, was it always perfect? No, but he still had some really good games for this Utah team, helped them have some big rushing performance. The good definitely outweighed the bad with Paul Miley, in my opinion. And I thought he was still a really good starting center for this team last season. Just like I think Johnny May is going to be a good starting center for this team. Johnny and the much like I talked about with Nick Ford being the starting center. And then whenever Paul came in, I was like, Paul Miley's outstanding. I felt the same way about Johnny last year. I think Johnny's outstanding. And I think it's Johnny's job now. I think he's going to come in and be the starting center. I know some other guys would be vying for the chance to start at center, but I don't like them as much as I like Johnny Maya. I think he's a physical run blocker. I think he does a good job in pass protection too, keeping a good base, sitting back, letting guys come to him, keeping them in front of him, doesn't lean in his stance, which is very important along the offensive line. So I'm a big Johnny Maya fan. I think he's ready to step in and lead this offensive line. And look, I think in terms of the room, Keaton Bills will probably command the most respect, or maybe Satawa too. I mean, because what Satawa's done at guard, I think between the two of them, that's where it comes into play because look, like I said, I feel better at Keaton Bills at left guard than I do Satawa Laumea at right tackle. If Satawa was at right guard, I think he is Utah's best offensive lineman overall, slight edge over Keaton. But either way, and I do think Michael, like I said, Mokafisi's in for a big jump this season. I feel like as he was probably, if you had to go with the worst Utah offensive lineman last year, I would say. Now, I say worst with an asterisk. It's kind of like for those of you watching The Last of Us, if you guys are familiar with that show, one of the episodes of The Last of Us has to be your least favorite, while also recognizing it's a great show and all those kind of things. Same thing with Breaking Bad, The Office, whatever kind of shows you guys prefer, basically. But when you're talking about Mokafisi, I still really like him, and I thought he had a good season overall. But there were also a lot of down games, I thought, and things where it's like he needs to improve and do a little bit better on. And I think they'll have an opportunity to do that coming up in 2023, and it starts in spring ball making those improvements. Now, what is the biggest question along the offensive line heading into spring ball? That's the left tackle spot. For the third straight year, Utah will be looking for a new left tackle. We had Bam Olaseni coming over, and I guess Jaron Kump held the position a little bit through he was a team starter for the first couple weeks and then had the injury and had to go out, but from there, once Bam came in and emerged. So Utah will have their third different starting left tackle, more than likely. Because I guess I will say, I mean, Kump could take the job right back. I mean, he's had it before, he's had experience. Was he great at it in the time? No, I think part of the reason the Utah line offense did take a step forward was in part not just Cam Rising, but I did think Bam Olaseni was better than Jaron Kump that season. But Kump still does a lot of positive things. We know how much Jim Hardy likes him. He's a team first guy. Kump can do a lot of things to he was very well versed in every position along the offensive line. And once again, he has the experience at tackle, which I think is extremely important too, especially when you're trying to block some of the premier guys in the Pac 12. So, a lot to like about Jaron Kump. There's also a lot to love about Falcon Kalmatule, including the size. Falcon's a big dude. And I think it seemed like he was going to win one of the tackle jobs last season. And then everyone surprised us and they flipped Satawa out to right tackle because they thought that was the best. They wanted to get the best five guys out there. And they felt like that combination gave them the best five guys. And once again, Utah still got really good results last season, but you could see against a team like a Penn State, right, where Utah's offensive line as a whole struggled, and it'll be interesting to see if this year's group, if they do get that opportunity to go back to the Rose Bowl or do anything special like that, if they are able to have a strong performance and not allow that pressure to kind of break in, because we saw how much the game for Utah's offense fell apart when you lost Cam, your guy who's great at escaping pressure, versus Bryson, more of a statue in the pocket. So I think it's going to be a fun battle. Shout out to Zero Williams too. I think he'll be involved in the mix. But I mean, this will really, to me, it's coming down to Falcon and Jaron. And gut feeling, it's tough because I feel like we've seen Coach Harding, like if he believes in one of his guys, he's going to stick with him. So maybe it will be Jaron. But at the same time, he also didn't have Jaron out there last year when he easily could have at right tackle. So maybe it will be Falcon on the left side. I'm really excited to watch these guys kind of battle it out for it at the left tackle spot. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see. Also, last guy I'll shout out for spring ball offensive line. We get to see Spencer Fano coming up here. One of the best recruits Utah has ever landed, is enrolled early. I'm excited to hear what Coach Witt says about him, what Coach Harding does, how he handles those one-on-ones early on. I think this early experience is going to be really valuable for him. I expect him to start kind of working in at guard early on, although we saw at the Polynesian Bowl, he did a really good job snapping when he was asked to do that. So either way, it's going to be really interesting to see what his role in this offense looks like in terms of the spring ball production. And if he has a chance to make anything interesting on the interior, once again, I'd be shocked if he somehow beat like Johnny Maya out or a Moka Fisi. But hey, when you got a guy as talented as Spencer Fano, it's not a good idea to count him out. So I'm not going to count him out completely. But like I said, if I had to bet going into spring ball what the offensive line looks like for right now, I'll go with Jaron Kump, Keaton Bills, Johnny Maya, Michael Mokafisi, and Satawa Lau Maya. And it'll be interesting to see if this offensive line, when the 2023 season rolls around, can be better than last year's. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to grade last year's offensive line and the performance they had when we come back in a second. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at RC Willie. RC Willie is hiring delivery drivers in the Salt Lake area. If you're looking for a rewarding career with a great group of people, come work for RC Willie. Utah's largest home furnishing store, RC Willie is currently hiring for delivery drivers. Their large warehouse by the Salt Lake Airport. Delivery drivers are the face of RC Willie, and they're looking for great delivery drivers in the northern Utah area. Compensation for delivery drivers is $24 an hour during training, and our average delivery driver makes $50,000 to $80,000 per year. RC Willie associates love their job, and the benefits are great. They offer a $1,000 sign-on bonus and hands-on training, including CDL training, but no CDL is required. Many of their employees have been with the company for over 20 years, and they have a modern fleet of delivery trucks. So come make a difference and join America's home furnishing store of choice. Apply online at rcwillie.com/jobs. That's rcwillie.com/jobs. Okay, so to close this one out, we're going to talk about the Utah offensive line of last year, the 2022 season. What we're going to grade Utah's offensive line. And in order to do that, we got to look back on some of the numbers last season. So first thing for Cam, sacked 9 times, but with how many games he played on the season, and one of those coming against Penn State once again, who was outstanding. Most of these sacks actually came late in the season against Penn State. Honestly, if you look at the game where Utah surrendered the most sacks and pressures, I believe it actually was I guess Cam was only sacked once in the Penn State game. That does, based on what I remember him running for his life, that does not match up from what I saw. Looking at Bryson was the one who really took the brunt of that. Bryson was sacked once in the regular season and sacked 4 times against Penn State. So I guess when I just see Utah quarterbacks going down, it was more so Bryson. But that's the thing. This Utah offensive line was outstanding overall in the season. They didn't surrender many sacks, in total 15. 5 of those came against Penn State. So it's kind of telling to show you how this Utah offensive line was still good last year, but when they got against an elite defensive line, they weren't able to hold up as much. Now, Cam still had a strong year throwing the ball. Overall, Utah quarterbacks combined for nearly 3,490 yards. It was 3,489 yards. Also rushing the ball, Utah finished on the ground with over 3,047 yards. And I thought the Utah offensive line, I did think was consistent in the running game. There was a lot of uncertainty around the running backs, right? When you look at what Tavion Thomas, the up and down season he had, and especially the way Stanford game was great, but before that, there was a lot of meh between the Florida game and that Stanford game at the very end. JaQuindon Jackson's emergence was great. Mekhi Bernard battled injuries all season. Jalen Glover kind of battled some of the stuff that freshmen do, just kind of struggling with the vision and just not quite strong enough yet. Still said some great moments last season, but just freshman. He's going to obviously be better each year he's with this team, gets bigger and stronger, just like we saw Clark Phillips, who was really good his first year, make that rise up and climb to be one of the best corners to ever come through Utah, and what we expect to be a first, if not an early second round pick in Clark Phillips. So how am I going to grade the offensive line? I didn't put a number down because I wanted to think of it, because I'm like, I could think of it live. It'll just come to me, and it hasn't come to me yet. Because, as I said, I think when you look at it, let's just go down the offensive line. I think that would help me come up with my grade, right? So Braden Daniels, I'm giving Braden an A+. I thought Braden was outstanding on the left side. He was first team all conference too. I thought he absolutely earned it and deserved it. Lights out performance by him. Great in the run game. Outstanding in pass protection. Constantly kept Cam's blind side clean, excuse me. At the left guard spot, I'm gonna go Keaton Bills. I'm gonna give Keaton an A-. We'll go A- for Keaton. Still some really good stuff overall, but just a couple plays or times where it'd be like, oh, he lost that rep, or oh, you need to get to the second level and get that guy. For Paul Miley, I'm gonna go with a B. I think Paul was one of those guys who more so where it's like, oh, you had maybe 2 or 3 plays that were really good, and then you'd have one down play, especially against, I think about someone like Penn State. He really struggled in that game. But overall, I still thought Paul did really good things. So we'll go B for Paul. Mulcahy, C. I'm gonna go with C+. As I said, I still think I think he did a lot of positive things, but there were a lot of rough games as well where it was like he was really struggling. And when Michael wasn't in there, it was Jaron Kump, and when Jaron Kump was in there, Jaron didn't do outstanding at right guard either. That's why I'm hoping Jaron sticks out at tackle this season, because some guys are just more natural at their one position. So I'll go C+ for him. And then Satawa Laumea, I'm going to give Satawa a B+. I thought Satawa got a lot better as the season wore on, and I still think he deserves a B+. But as I mentioned, there were a lot of times he still got beat in pass protection. In terms of run blocking, I mean, easily an A+, if not an A, just a solid A. But I think when you combine pass protection, I just think a B is more natural to me, especially because if we're grading the whole season, I thought Satawa was a lot better as the year wore on outside of the Penn State game, the very final game. But before that, he was doing a great job. But there were some other games early on in the season where he just was still trying to figure things out. And it's hard when you played guard at such a high and elite level for so many years for you to then settle in kind of in that position and dominate right away. So that's where I think a B+ is fair for him. And overall for the offensive line, I think a B+ is fair. I think that's what I'm going to go with. Maybe it was probably going to be an A minus, if not for the Penn State game. But when you have that kind of a performance where you allow that many sacks and you just can't really do things on offense because you're constantly under duress and even run blocking, Utah ran the ball okay in that game, but not outstanding. That's where you kind of, when you go against an elite opponent, it kind of exposes some things. And I felt like it did for Utah's offensive line. So overall, I'm going to give the group a B plus, still a good year. And as we previewed with all the spring ball guys, I think there's a lot of optimism and reasons they could up that, even if they are going to be missing Braden Daniels, which is going to be very difficult to replace. But we also were worried, could they replace Nick Ford? And we saw how Paul Miley did a solid job there. So we'll see if Jaron Kump or Falcon Kalmatule can do a good job at replacing him on the offensive line. That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. But before you head out, we want to remind you that make your second listen every day Locked On College Basketball. March is here and the madness is in full effect. So make sure you guys head out and over and check out Locked On College Basketball, where host Andy Patton and Isaac Shade have all these fantastic guests on, coaches, insiders, experts, analysis, players, interviews too. You can find it all at Locked On College Basketball, your premier home for March Madness. Thank you guys again for making Locked On Utes your first listen every day. That's going to do it for today's episode, but we'll see you tomorrow.